This weekend we celebrate the feast of St. Joseph the Worker. And one of the things I reflected on about the life of St. Joseph is that he is a carpenter. And he passed along that carpentry to his son Jesus. And carpentry takes a lot of skill, talent, and experience. You just can't give me a hammer, nails, and a saw and expect me to build your house. It wouldn't happen. Likewise, any of the other skilled trades, like carving or painting. I can't just take carving tools or paint or canvas and expect to be a masterpiece. In the same way, though, I always thought that cutting the vines was kind of a low-grade, low-skill job. You know, here, just take these clippers and have at it. But I watched recently a video from a guy who trims vines in the Napa Valley, which is expensive wines. And he was telling me how difficult it was to be a person who cut these vines. Because first of all, you need to be able to know when to cut it. That if you cut it when it's too soon, you're going to injure the plant, and there's going to be bugs and infestations in the plant itself, and it'll die. And even if you do it too early as well, you might have frost on your newly formed buds. But on the other hand, if you wait too late, you're not going to get the yield you want, and the season is going to be shortened. And so you have to time it right. And then after you time it right, you need to know what you're going to do to cut and prune these back. Because once you prune it, you're shaping where this vine is going. For example, he said that I'm looking 2-3 years down the road where this vine is going to be. You know, do I want it this way, or do I want it to grow that way? And beyond that, you need to plan so that there's shade over the grapes, because if the grapes are exposed to the sunlight, it's going to ruin the quality of the harvest. And so he's saying in the end, it's like a masterpiece. You're sculpting it, especially on these old vines where things have been cut time and time again, that if you do it right, it really is a piece of art. And so when Jesus says that God is a vine dresser, he's the one who takes the care and concern to sculpt each and every one of us. Look at what happened with St. Paul. He was Saul, and I first always asked myself, why didn't he call him when Jesus was still walking the earth? Why didn't he call them when the disciples first started to preach the resurrection of Jesus from the dead? Why didn't he call him when he was persecuting the Christians in Jerusalem? No, he was called when he was on the road to Damascus to persecute Christians. He was right then, right there, he was open to hearing God's word. Right then, right there, was a time to be pruned. And God called him at that time and pruned him. But then he went on to be pruned even further, because he goes to Damascus and preaches the resurrection and gets persecuted for it and has to leave to go to Jerusalem. And there he preaches the resurrection of Christ and gets persecuted and gets sent to Tarsus. And there he preaches the resurrection of Jesus and gets persecuted, and then goes to Antioch, to Corinth, to Philippi, back to Jerusalem, and eventually to Rome, where he's beheaded. And in each of these locations, he leads fruit of a believing community that grows and nourishes on its own. And so he becomes who he was meant to be. Not Saul, the persecutor of Christians, not Paul of Tarsus, but St. Paul, apostle to the Gentiles. And in that, we are trimmed as well. I know from my own life, if you had told me I was going to be a priest, even up through college, I would have laughed at your face and said, no way. But it was only after I encountered Christ after college, after I started to follow him more deeply, was I open to hearing his call for me to follow him as a priest. But even then, after that, I've been trimmed and pruned in many ways, whether it's through my selfishness, whether it's through not knowing how to be a minister, whether it's through being challenged by other different communities I went, and throughout my whole seminary process and my priesthood. I have been formed and pruned many times to bear much fruit to the people around me and within myself as well. It is this pruning which has made me the person I am today, and hopefully I will be pruned even further so I will be the priest He has called me to become. And that's our role, to allow the Word of Christ to prune us, to allow ourselves to be pruned so that we might bear fruit and become the example, that disciple that He has called us to be. It is up to us this morning, ask the Lord, prune me so I can bear fruit and be who you've called me to be.